So this is my recipe for the country loaf that I usually make. First, I'm going to show you here just a little bit of feeding the starter. I always feed with 75 grams of flour, 75 grams of water overnight, pretty much every day. I don't feed twice a day usually because I find it's a little bit wasteful for the flour, but yeah, twice a day, 76 grams. Almost got it this time, and then pouring in the water as well here. Get 76 grams of this as well. So once this is all measured out, we just mix it up, let it sit out over the course of a good few hours. After 24 hours, this is really kind of overripe for making sourdough. So really, I aim for usually that kind of overnight. So this is an overnight. You can see it really kind of puffs up in that first bit, and then kind of evens out. So anywhere in there where it's all full of bubbles is where you want to go. This is my mix. I'm using a little bit of spelt flour, but mostly all-purpose flour. This is typically how I go. Add in 80 degree water. I'm going to have the full recipe in the link below, or in the description below. So measuring out my water, I'm using 380 grams of water here. And then we're going to get into the first mix. This is called autolyse. So you basically mix together the flour and the water without the starter and the salt. You can let this rest for kind of as long as you like, but at least probably 30 minutes to an hour and up to overnight. I've done both of those. The longer you let the flour hydrate, the better it'll be. And here I'm just basically mixing together the flour and the water just to get rid of any dry spots. You're not really aiming for any kneading, any stretching, anything like that right now. You're just trying to get everything mixed together. I usually use a spatula just because it's a little bit easier. You can use your hands too, though. Many different options there. All right, so weighing out the salt. This recipe calls for 10 grams of salt. So 2%. Everything works off of baker's percentages in my recipe. You'll see that below. I'll go into details there. So once we hit 10 grams here, I'm going to pour that into the bulk fermentation to start mixing. So once we've added that and the starter, there will be 75 grams of starter here. So adding in the salt here. So I'm going to add in the salt and the starter, and then I'm going to do the first of what we call folds. So you're going to do 5 folds over the course of the first basically 2.5 hours. You'll do them every 30 minutes. And each time you're basically going to reach into the dough and pull each corner up and over the dough to kind of stretch it out. And this is really the only kneading that happens. You never turn this dough out onto a surface and really knead it vigorously. So you're going to see me doing this here. This is the first one where I'm mixing in the levain and the salt, but they all basically look the same. As it goes, this process gets easier. The dough gets a little bit more elastic. It gets nicer to feel. The first one is kind of a little bit stiff. And then I often will pull it out and kind of stretch it over my fingers as well. This works better with wet hands, so that's what I was doing there, just wetting my hands up a little bit to make sure that it's not going to stick as much. So basically, this is what you're doing. You're kind of just trying to stretch the dough out. You're trying to develop that gluten, but it's really only takes, I don't know, I never spend more than probably 90 seconds on it. So this is what we're doing here. So then after this, we're going to go into bulk fermentation. I think this one did bulk fermentation for about 5 hours. This is a pretty forgiving step. You want to go until it's expanded by about 50%. So you can see these turns at the beginning here. Every time it kind of resets, that's one of the turns. And then this is that final bulk fermentation for another few hours. And you can see it expands. It's not like super blowing up. So once the bulk fermentation is complete, now we're on to the final prove. First we do a bench rest. This is where you kind of start to develop some of the tension in the loaf, but you don't do the final forming. You kind of form the dough. You'll see me do this in a second here, but kind of using the tension of the countertop and the countertop to really kind of just stretch the dough over itself. It'll turn into kind of like a little ball, and then you'll just cover it with a damp towel and let that sit for probably, I don't know, 30 minutes usually is what I do. It can go a little bit longer. You kind of want it to look like a big, fat, thick pancake when it's done, kind of round edge. So just adding quite a lot of flour here. You don't want to try and work too much flour into the dough as you're doing this step or the next step. It's a little bit tricky. I'm not super good at it, but it's not too big of a deal here. So kind of just folding all the corners in, so you're kind of just developing this tension along the top here. So you can see I kind of use my pinkies and the heels of my hand and pull it against and push it against the surface of the counter there. So this is after that bench rest. You can see it's kind of that thick pancake shape. It's kind of spread out a little bit. So now I'm this device here is called a Banneton, and it's what I do my proofing in. They're not very expensive. You can buy them on Amazon, so that's probably a good thing to have. If you don't have one, you can definitely do the proof in a just a normal bowl with a tea towel in it with lots of flour. So here I'm going to do the final shaping. This is a step that I have been working on perfecting over the course of many years, and I'm still not very good at it yet. Every time it comes out a little bit different. But basically, you kind of do a series of folds here. So you pull the bottom up over the bottom, sorry, bottom up about a third, and then you're going to turn each side into the middle. You'll see me do this, just flouring my hands a little bit. One side in, one side in. And then you kind of pull the end towards you, and then I roll it away from me like that, and then kind of similar thing using the surface of the counter to pull that forward. So just resetting there a little bit. I've also tried this technique, you'll see me do it here in a second, where you kind of turn it over and then pull in the edges to kind of keep pulling that that other side taut. I was not particularly successful with this time. Sometimes it works better than others. And then you'll see me kind of adjust this a little bit. If you notice, it's slightly oblong. That right side is quite a bit skinnier than the left side. So I shift it by 90 degrees here and form it into an oval that way. So my baking dish and my bannetons are oval, so I'm kind of aiming for a little loaf shape here. If you have round bannetons and are baking in a cast iron, which is kind of the more typical way for home cooks, aim for something a little bit more round here. So you can see I have a little loaf shape here, kind of folded over. It's totally fine. Now is the point where basically you can't use too much flour. Tons of flour in the banneton, tons of flour on the dough. You really don't want to stick to the banneton. It's a pain in the butt when it does. And so the more flour, the better here. You can always dust it off later, but this dough's not going to get, but this flour's not going to get worked into the dough. Give it a good dusting on top, and then this dough I decide to proof in the fridge overnight. You can also proof it on the counter for a couple of hours, either way. So now we're into the oven. So I have this dish that's specifically made for baking bread. It's just a cast iron pan, but it's kind of got that oblong shape to it and plenty of room. We're doing the score here. This basically is what allows the expansion in the oven. Doughs rise by yeast kind of up until this point and a little bit in the oven, but really a lot of the kind of final, what they call oven spring, that kind of poof in the oven, really comes from steam. So this gives it a way for it to all to expand. I just tend to do one stripe across the top these days. I don't get too fancy. I have tried to get fancy in the past. It's kind of fun, but overall it tastes the same either way. So put the top on the dough. This is basically to trap any steam in there and make sure that it's quite a humid environment, especially during this early stage. So this oven has been preheated at 500 degrees, and then it goes down to 450 for the rest of the time. After 20 minutes, you pull the top off. This lets it expand, and you can see your beautiful bread for the first time at this point. So then you want to bake it for probably another 20, 30, 40 minutes, something like that, until it looks like this. Beautiful golden brown, really crusty, and it's delicious. Fresh out of the oven with some butter, and slice it up and eat it. That's my recipe. Thanks.